The marketers are very good at marketing, but sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, I don't really know what they're saying. There's a lot of companies in this space. If you could, Jigar, can you tell us what is Sisu and what do you guys do?
Sisu is the decision intelligence tool.
Yeah.
So I generally explain it through an example. So let's say you're an e-commerce company and you are kind of worried about your KPIs, like what is your average order size or how are my customers doing? A lot of companies have a lot of data about all of this. Like e-commerce company would have petabytes of data on how user activities are happening. But whenever there is a question about why is my average order size going up or why is my cart size going down, they actually get into some manual way of figuring things out. So a typical way of doing things is data analyst would spend weeks or months to figure out this data, like why something changed. What Sisu does is we have developed this machine learning algorithms. So we could actually tell you what impacts your KPI within minutes. So that's our really the crux essence of Sisu, that we can tell you why something changed across this huge dimension space within minutes that generally takes hours, weeks, or months to get that data out.
Okay, so I'm getting a little bit fired up because this is something that we at Mission have been looking for. And I've been in e-commerce and I know my customers back then were looking for it. And I've been in social media management, I've been in software for a while. That thing you just said, that simple three-letter word, why, right? I think data has historically been very good identifying what is happening. No one actually knows why anything happens, or they didn't used to know, or it wasn't clearly obvious right out the gate. You already mentioned data analysts. If anyone goes and looks at the job requisitions at a big company, you'll see tons of analyst jobs. A lot of people are in charge of figuring out why anything happens. I got a question for you. What is unique, or what are you building at Sisu that is able to do this? Because one of the things I used to always think about, and I think that it's still true, is, a lot of times why something has happened doesn't necessarily give enough signal, right? There's not enough signal to demonstrate why something is changing. And so I used to think it was going to be like standard deviations away from the norm. Like if you noticed a 2 standard deviation away from norm pattern in certain data variables, that something was happening there. But it was really hard to track. Give me an idea I know you can't give away everything, but give us an idea of how you're able to mathematically or using software technology figure out the why of something, why it's happening.
Yeah. So it would be good to share some context. Sisu, originated from our founder's work at Stanford. So Peter was an assistant professor at Stanford, and he was working on this particular project about, hey, we have a lot of data to explain what, but very little to explain why. Mm-hmm. So our roots in terms of technology, they're based in statistical ML. So you can imagine a typical e-commerce scenario where you have, let's say, 300 columns or 300 dimensions. The dimensions could be geolocation, it could be customer age, it could be the type of product and things like that. So when you have a high dimensional space, and then each of these dimension has certain values, right? Like geolocation could be all the states within the United States, or it could be Canada and a bunch of other countries. In a high dimensional space, a combination of those dimension and values can be very large. It could be millions of combinations. Mm-hmm. What we do is we calculate impact of all of those combinations on a KPI. So for example, your average order size went up overall, but it went up because in Washington, there was a campaign and people started buying ski gear early on rather than waiting for winter to arrive. And that actually changed your average order size. Now that's like a needle in a haystack, like you have to really figure it out. Washington, a particular city in Washington and a particular age group is impacting this average order size. So what we do is, using statistical ML, we figure out the impact created by each of these combinations. And then we surface the top combinations that actually are impacting a particular KPI. So out of 100 million combinations, we'll show you the first 1,000 and tell you that these are likely the reasons why your KPI moved up or down.
And how fast can that occur?
We can process hundreds of millions of combinations within minutes. So this is, and the reason we can do it is multifold. One is we are very optimized for this kind of calculation. So any kind of false discovery rate, statistical significance that we try to derive, we've optimized those algorithms. And second, we can actually scale out. So we can use multiple nodes and multiple compute and storage to get these results much faster. So yes, we can do hundreds of millions of combinations within minutes in a case which I just described, which is a typical scenario for Sisu to go after.
You know, when you just mentioned that commerce example, I do recall working with different commerce companies, and, you know, you'd have your, let's say, Monday or Tuesday weekly meeting to talk about sales demand in the last week. And then you would forecast your demand planning for the next week. All the while, the current week was just, like, no one really talked about the current week because you couldn't do anything about it. Give me an idea of what are people discovering, because this is one of those domains. This is one of those domains, right, where I think there's been a lot of companies. There's a lot of companies that claim that they can provide insights from data. And I think most buyers of this type of software have gotten more advanced, right? So they're going to want some level of proof of concept to be like, hey, you gotta, if your tool cannot find something that I don't know already, then it's probably not going to be worth it. I remember 5 years ago, McKinsey did a study that said, hey, most big data projects return less than 50% of the cost of implementing the project. I know that that's changed now because, of course, the technology's improved. But give us an idea of some of the stories or some of the things that you've heard of businesses when they first implement this, or their first POC when they were, you know, like just discovering things that they just otherwise couldn't figure out, or maybe by the time they did figure it out, it was too late to do something about it. Like you mentioned that demand change. For example, if it was a seasonal demand or a weather-based demand, if the weather pattern's gone, obviously the demand is gone. So I didn't know if you had any stories or examples.
My favorite example was about a food company, actually a large pizza chain.
Okay.
And they were using Sisu as a POC, and they were trying to figure out, like, how is the sales per store looking? And they were comparing different locations and figuring out why is one location not doing better than the other location. And there were lots of dimensions in a pizza place, right? Like you have a location, you have time of the week. It could be other factors like weather, like you may be in Michigan and your pizza sales dip because it's too hot versus in California. And when they actually put a lot of these things into Sisu, what they figured out is one of the ingredients was changed. The vendor who was supplying that ingredient into that particular store was different than other stores. And that's why that was one of the factors why things started dropping after that change happened. So we could detect that there was a change, and that was one of the drivers of why the sales actually dropped. So this is something happened before I joined Sisu, but I've heard this example many times. Another typical example would be e-commerce space, where there are a whole bunch of dimensions. And I was giving you an example on particular types of campaigns or particular types of product types. It's very difficult to really figure out a particular combination that is driving things up and down. And by the way, the first factor is generally easy to figure out. So if it is clearly a location, it's easy to even visualize this in charts.
Sure.
But when it is a combination of things, where we say this is the location, plus that's the age group, plus this is the particular product type, that's actually moving your KPI up and down. So when your dimensions grow from single dimensions to multiple factors, it becomes very hard problem to do it manually. So lots of our fintech clients and e-commerce clients are feeding us maybe hundreds of dimensions. And that's where this insight actually comes up pretty easily in Sisu. By the way, I think keep in mind, sometimes these are obvious insights. So what we do is we also give them a way to suppress obvious insights. Like, for example, seasonality, as you were mentioning.
Yeah.
Or if you are a fintech company, volatility of the stock market, of course, it's going to impact your results. But you can say, I want to see impact outside of that volatility.
IT Visionaries is powered by Salesforce Platform and Dreamforce. Did you know all the best Dreamforce sessions are available free on salesforce.com/plus? We recommend watching the platform and MuleSoft keynote to get the down low on doing more with less and increasing efficiencies with automation.